We have a real treat for you today, definitely worth the little bit of extra wait time. We have today Maryanne Wolf, who is the director of the Center for Dyslexia, Diverse Learners, and Social Justice at the UCLA Graduate School of Education and Information Studies. So Maryanne is also the author of Reader Come Home, The Reading Brain in a Digital World, which was published in 2018, just in time, right, for the pandemic, by HarperCollins. I had just a wonderful conversation with Maryanne earlier this year about how to teach kids to read, what mediums work best. And I am so excited that she will hopefully be able to join us today. We have had a warning, we have had some technical difficulties, but we're hoping that we've overcome them. So fingers crossed, audience, and thank you for your patience. So Maryanne, are you there? Can you hear me?
I certainly am, Alyson. Can you hear me?
I can. It's so delightful to hear your voice again. And I'm really excited.
Good, Alyson.
Yeah, I'm excited to share your expertise with our audience. Thank you so much for powering through some technical difficulties. Thank you. And I'm sure it's actually very ironic, right, Maryanne, that we're on a panel about technology and having these.
Of course. I think it's all the semi-negative things I've had to say. There must be the god of technology is mad at me.
Well, let's be quiet. Let's all send. I don't know what the appropriate appeasement is, if there is a god of technology, and probably I'm waiting. Well, should have waited into, but anyway, but whatever it is, just send a kiss to your computer, everybody, and we'll hope that Maryanne will be able to stay with us. So Maryanne, I'll jump right into it, and don't worry about those technology gods. It's okay for you to go ahead and bash tech if you want to. Just tell the truth, right? So when you and I spoke earlier this year, I asked you, like, the money question, right? Whether it's better for most kids to read on a screen or on a physical book. And I was really hoping, reporter, yes or no answer. And of course you said it's complicated.
It's complicated.
So let's start with real physical books, right? And I'm sure, what are the advantages after everything you've gone through today, right? What are the advantages of the old-fashioned way of doing things?
Well, the reality is it's not old-fashioned at all. Really, the beauty of this moment in time is that we are understanding there are advantages and disadvantages in different devices and the physicality of books. And I think this is a frontier moment, Alyson, that you and I have talked about, a hinge moment. And in hinge moments, there are, as I said, there are complicated truths. So let's talk about the advantages that print gives us. Very, very importantly for us to understand, especially with children, the very physicality of the book and the way we learn to associate a certain speed, if you will, a rate of processing that actually encourages us to, and I want to say process, but I also want to say enjoy and savor written language in print. Now, I want to immediately put that in juxtaposition with what we usually do with the screen. The screen has many advantages in terms of being able to absorb information, vast amounts, but what we tend to do is actually skim. We word spot, we browse, we scroll, and in that very act, even though it gives us more information more quickly, it actually disadvantages the slower, deeper processing of language that print advantages us for. Now, Alyson, you and I talked about the reading brain, and I know we don't have a lot of time to do a 101 on the reading brain, but actually everything I say emanates from our understanding of what the brain does when it reads on different devices. There's a very basic circuit that we have for decoding that children are learning when when they are 5, 6, 7, etc. And that very basic circuit begins to elaborate. The more automatic the children, the more fluent, the more proficient they become. And what they're doing with that elaboration is learning how to give attention and time to what I call the deep reading processes. And those include empathy, perspective taking, critical analysis, which is so important for especially these days when misinformation and disinformation are both so rampant. So what the print medium does, especially in the learning of it in those first 10 years, is give advantages to the development of deep reading processes. Now, it's not that we can't use deep reading on the screen. Alyson, you and I are on the screen 10 hours a day. But the reality is yes, unfortunately. But and there are advantages to that because we must absorb so much information. But the disadvantages is that the screen is actually hastening us along by the very, if you will, characteristics of the device. Marshall McLuhan, Walter Ong, the philosopher, all of them were actually preparing us to understand that the medium changes us. The medium changes the message. Well, from a physiological viewpoint, a brain processing point, if you will, the circuit that we use reflects the characteristics or affordances of the medium. So when we have as a desire for our children to really develop those deep reading processes and to spend time, we really are absolutely, from the research to this point, we should be using more print and less screen. They, of course, parallel. Processing should be learning all the beauty, the complementarity of screens for information, for some of our children who actually are better with screens. But the reality is we have data from 0 to 20 showing that our children and our adolescents and our young adults comprehend better in sequencing details of the plot, etc., when they're reading the same material on print versus screen.
Absolutely.
For a quick.
Yes, no, that was great. So
answer.
to sum up, my summary of Maryanne is generally like having a physical book in your hand, especially when you're sort of in their developing brain stage, but really even for people like me and Maryanne, who are, our brains are far along in development, really encourages deep. Okay, so we know the advantages of print. If there are any advantages of screens, and remember, we want to appease those technology gods, what are those? What are the advantages of screens? What might be better about them, if anything?
Okay, now here's where, again, there's a complexity. There's a complexity based on how developed that reading brain circuit is, because if it already is developed like yours and mine, Alyson, we can learn, and that's what I wrote in Reader Come Home, we can learn to discipline ourselves and use our deep reading processes on the screen. But an immediate advantage is that when we are so bombarded with information, it's really an advantage to be able to process a lot of information quickly. Now, the advantage that we all know is that it gives us access to inordinate amounts of information. Now, there's a paradox here, Alyson, and the paradox is the following. Because we have so much information, you would think that we would sample across the broad spectrum of available information. The reality is that we often, as not, go to the familiar sources that confirm what we had already thought in the beginning, thereby, in fact, not giving us a broader familiarity with alternative viewpoints, perspectives, etc. So there's even, I'm rushing the argument here, but there's even an argument for thinking about the implications of people who are speedily processing familiar sources of information, not getting alternative viewpoints, and therefore being more vulnerable and susceptible to, if you will, even demagoguery. So I'm rushing my argumentation, Alyson, but there are implications for how we read, for how we think, and even how we vote. And so for me as a neuroscientist, it is not that I'm against the gods of technology, by no means. We must learn to use them, but we must learn digital wisdom. And that digital wisdom, for me, begins in the education of our young into a situation where teachers are taught how to instill and insist on deep reading across mediums. So there's a lot of implications for our teachers as well as for our students and parents.
I hear you, absolutely. So if physical books, right, are that better medium, and we did get into this a little bit in the last session, why do we have so much digital reading these days? Is it just more convenient? Yeah. Why do you think that is?
Alyson, if I may even invoke what you first said, you said that old-fashioned medium of print. And indeed, a lot of people fail to understand that this is not an old-fashioned medium, nor is it a binary situation we're in right now. Rather, it is a time in which we're gathering knowledge, even at the level of what are the connections in the brain for children who are on the screen a great deal versus those who are not. We're gathering so much information about the true beauty of what different mediums can give us. But the reality, just as you said, is that some people see it as a binary between something that's old-fashioned or traditional versus something that is new. And that is the wrong, if you will, perspective on this whole. It should rely on a central principle, and that is, what is the purpose of this form of reading? What is our purpose? If it's simply a quick email or a perusal of information, the screen is absolutely better. I do not want to deep read your emails, Alyson, as clever as you are.
I'm so hurt, Maryanne.
But I absolutely want to be able to print out those pieces of, if you will, of either information or literature that I want to truly process at deeper levels. And so anything that involves, for example, a review of a journal article that I need to be very analytic about, I'm going to print that out. The same way with a poem or a book that I want to read and I know the author has just carefully chosen every word, what Italo Calvino called the perfect way of expressing. For those pieces of literature, for those pieces of information that are requiring that of me, the print medium is superior. But as all of us know, that does not take away from the extraordinary amount of information that complements the print medium. So I'm never going to be, if you will, cornered into saying one is better than the other. Rather, I ask the question, what, reader, dear reader, is the purpose of this reading for you, this material? And depending on the answer, and also some of the developmental characteristics of our individuals, that will determine which medium is better. But I will actually say that for some individuals, and we have interesting research coming on that. For some individuals, for example, those who would need different font size, different emphasis on syntax, etc., the digital medium has ability to transform the text in such ways that can be very happily used by different individuals.
So yes, that's absolutely true. So I think when we spoke before, you said, for instance, a kid who may not see well, or an older adult even who may not see well, you can make the text larger. You can have some of it read out loud, right? You can head into background information. And that's unfortunately not something. And I guess I'm tipping my hand by calling it old-fashioned, right? That's not something that you can do with the books that I was reading growing up, which were, of course, only physical books, because that's all they had back in the 80s and 90s. So I told you, Maryanne, when we spoke on the phone before, but I am a mom, a toddler mom. And I know you know a lot about early childhood. So I've noticed that my son, now I try not to give him too much screen time. Obviously, I'm the tech reporter here, but he will say he's really bored, right? If I let him look at a screen for too long, and then I'll do something, then I move away from that, he'll go bored, right? And I've definitely heard my niece and nephew say that too. So you said that this is totally normal, right? Why do kids say that they're bored after they've been reading or looking at a screen for a while? They may not say that when you take away a regular print book. I think you used the phrase
and Alyson,
at some point. So
Alyson, this is such an important question, because I've been working with pediatricians like Barry Zuckerman, Saya, and they're all showing us and trying to give guidelines to other pediatricians that we are overstimulating the attentional processes of our young. We are in fact making them almost require constant novel stimulation. Now, there's a double whammy here, because in evolution, human beings have a reflex to look at novelty. That helps us survive. We were able to see what was poisonous, or what we needed to eat, or what was in fact a predator's track. So the novelty reflex is something that's part of our evolutionary history. But in a young child whose frontal lobes are anything but mature, they are unable to inhibit, and they in fact are wanting more and more novelty. So the screen is both very exciting, but in fact over exciting the attentional processes, and they are in fact learning to be constantly distracted by novelty. And this is what happens when a child goes off the screen and says, basically, I'm bored, is the equivalent of give me more stimulation. I need stimulation. I need distraction. And that is something we do not want for our young children. There's all kinds of interesting evidence by pediatric neurologists like John Hutton in Cincinnati that shows us that when you give the same 3-year-old 3 different formats, audio version, the screen iPad version, versus a parent reading that same little story to the child, the language regions of the brain that are being developed and activated are best for when the parent is reading and the child is not overstimulated by the iPad. So what he calls the Goldilocks effect is best for our children when we are interacting with the child and the print, looking at their faces, understanding when they receive or do not receive the kind of meaning the print is giving. We are if you will, we are able to elaborate language in that way, and we are avoiding the creation of overstimulated systems by our children. Now, not only are they overstimulated, they are using their own, if you will, language processes as well as when we are either in audio are in parent. Parent being best, audio second, iPad third. So, Alyson, with your toddler, I like Barry Zuckerman, I would say, treat the screen like a teddy bear. The teddy bear is wonderful some of the time, but never as a reward or as a punishment or as a babysitter. Rather, it's something that's just part of the environment.
I can't say I never used it as a babysitter. Certainly, I'm sure every parent can relate.
We
Sure.
know that.
I love what you said, Maryanne. Yeah, we all have had those moments, right? Where we're on deadline. Well, as a reporter on deadline, but anyway.
We all have them.
Yeah, we've all had those moments. I'm sure teachers in their classrooms have had moments where they need to do something and they have to show something on a screen too. So let's talk, you mentioned audio, right? So I think like you, right, I'm a huge fan of audiobooks. So when are audiobooks appropriate? Would they be appropriate for my toddler? Would they be appropriate for a kid who's in like upper elementary? What about high school? When is an audiobook most appropriate?
It's such a good question, and people incorrectly assume that I'm opposed to audio. Not at all. One of the really important aspects of deep reading is the use of background knowledge, and I find audiobooks so important for giving background knowledge at all. Basically for everyone, for myself, for the kids. But is that the ideal device or medium for the most critical analytic and perspective taking processes? No. And here's why. Even though you are unaware of it, when you are reading print, you are monitoring your comprehension. And so when you are on a screen, you are tending to go as fast as you can because there is, if you will, a psychological set to get to the end of that section. Go on. It almost by nature hastens us. And to a lesser extent, but in a similar vein, the audio is continuously feeding us this information. Now, can we go back? Of course we can. Do we go back? Unlikely. So that means that the monitoring of our comprehension, which is imperceptible when we're reading print, is not happening in the same way when we are listening. So even though I find it a real resource, just as people didn't think radio would last, radio lasted. In part because the human voice is a wonderful thing, and the audio gives us that. But does it give us the absolute best in our ability to comprehend? That is reserved for print.
Okay. So that makes sense. I'm kind of feeling bad about my audiobooks now, but I hear you.
Oh no, don't.
No. I know that wasn't your intention, right? Yeah, I know that wasn't your intention. I'm joking with you, but so okay, we talked about some different kinds of screens, but I will admit I have a Kindle Paperwhite, and I just bought one for my 10-year-old niece because my sister thinks it'll help her read more for pleasure. Do you think a Kindle or another, there's competitors to the Kindle that does not allow, that really is supposed to be an e-reader, has a leg up on like a tablet or a phone, and is it as good as that print book, which I know, as I said, old-fashioned print book? Is it as good as the old-fashioned print book?
So as with everything, there are differences in both the individual and the device's interaction with the individual. From my standpoint, there's only a little bit of research on this by the Norwegian Anne Mangen in the eRead network, and that research does show that the Kindle is absolutely better in terms of comprehension and comprehension monitoring, sequencing, details of plot, etc. It's better by far than, let's say, a laptop, iPad type thing where you are really in no matter what we say, we have the temptation of distraction on those kinds of devices, whether it's phone, iPad, laptop, etc. So the Kindle restricts the amount of distraction or distractibility, and therefore is better. Does it have the same advantages that print has? No, print still has advantages over Kindle. But you're asking me about a continuum, and in that continuum, Kindle has a place that is better than those other devices for the reasons that you already know, Alyson. You are restricting yourself from the 27 distractions per hour that our youth usually experience when they're reading on their iPads or their laptops or on their cell phones.
No, that is totally true. So I think this is a good question to end on. We'll see if we end up having time for another one, but let's say we don't make this transition well, right? And we end up raising a generation of mostly online skimmers as opposed to deep readers. And you kind of got at this at the beginning, but what are the implications of that for our society if people are in general not reading deeply?
Alyson, I'm now, if you could see me, I'm physically slumped because this is the question that I am very concerned with, and I spend as much time as I can talking to, whether it's podcasts, wonderful people like you, educators, and in fact around the world. I'll do Croatia and Poland and the Netherlands last week. I am trying very hard to let people know that we must not let go of deep reading as one of the major goals and aspirations for our young. Now, as you know, I have had in Reader Come Home a proposal for developing a biliterate brain in which we really teach our children how to utilize deep reading on any device after making sure they're developing it. And I think that's easiest or more easily done with print those first 10 years. But the slump, the physical, psychological, even spiritual slump I experienced with that question is that deep reading is what allows us to have a kind of sanctuary inside ourselves, a place where our thoughts can meet other people's thoughts and release our best thinking, our insight, our epiphany, our ability to reflect. And I feel that the demise of deep reading is the analog to the demise of the reflective, contemplative aspects of society. We only need to think about what Aristotle said about what makes a good society. And he said there were 3 lives. The first life is the life of productivity and knowledge building. The second life is the life of, if you will, leisure and the arts. But the third life that is essential for a good society is the contemplative life, where there is space and time allocated for people to go into themselves and think about what is most important, what is most beautiful, what is true, what is honorable, what is just. And so for me, the deep reading processes allow us to aspire to the 3 lives that will make a good society. So yes, I am very worried, but I have great hope that especially people like you and people who are listening to this will realize that we each have a role in ensuring that deep reading processes can be developed and used on any medium. And there will be many more, Alyson, beyond our lifespan. But what will, I hope, be maintained for our species is this contemplative aspect that leads us to truth and to beauty for the future of our species.
Well, Maryanne, I think that was a perfect note to end on. And I want to thank you so much, and also thank the technology gods and Ari and Elena for bearing with us. And I especially want to thank our audience for bearing with us. I think Maryanne's interview was worth the wait. And thanks again so much to everyone for tuning in. We really appreciate it.
Thank you, Alyson. Godspeed to everyone.
Thank you, Maryanne.